Hi, I'm Mike Elam, and this is Buford Pusser, The Other Story.
We'd like to welcome everyone back. I'm Mike Elam. This is Buford Pusser, The Other Story. Today we're going to do an update on the investigation into the death of Pauline Pusser and her husband, Sheriff Buford Pusser. With me today is Oakley Dean Baldwin, the author of The Murder of Mrs. Pauline Pusser. Good morning, Dean.
How you doing, Mike?
I'm doing well. Tell us a little bit about your book real quick.
Right. We have Murder of Mrs. Buford Pusser as one of the 27 books that we have. And it was written because we had so many questions about Pauline's death that we didn't have answers for. And the Mullins family, of course, who I'm related to, they still have a lot of questions about unanswered circumstances and some of the evidence that I hope that we can talk about today.
Okay. I'm the author of Buford Pusser, The Other Story. In my book, I talk a lot about the investigation of 1967 into the death of Pauline Pusser. There's been a lot of changes in the past few years, and even since I wrote the book, we found new witnesses, new evidence that we presented to the TBI, and they have re-engaged in her murder investigation. And that's what this episode is going to be about, is basically the fact that they've re-engaged in some of the things that they may be looking at. But, for right now, going to take a short break and we'll be right back. Who killed Pauline Pusser? What does the evidence say? The TBI is again looking into Pauline's death, and after 60 years, we may be close to getting answers to that question. Was it a criminal element in northern Mississippi that was responsible for Pauline's death, as Buford claimed? Or was it Buford himself that murdered his wife? Dean, you were related to Pauline, and some of her other family members, of course. So can you tell us what they knew just prior to the ambush and even thereafter?
Right. I've spoken to several of her brothers and a sister, nieces, a couple nephews over the last couple of years since we've been investigating this story. And the actual relationship between Pauline and the sheriff, as far as they knew, was average. They weren't aware of any type of domestic violence or anything like that. So, some of the things that I've shared with them, they were not aware of.
Okay. I talked to some of the family a few years ago, and they told me the same thing. They were unaware of any domestic violence. However, I have interviewed a number of Pauline's friends, and they tell me about her sneaking her clothes out of the house because she was planning to leave Buford. They've told me about the seeing bruising on her arms and such as that from where she alleged that Buford was rough with her. I'm told that she was scared of Buford. And then the odd thing is, right before the August 12th ambush, Pauline went with Buford allegedly on a disturbance call. They received a call early in the morning on the morning of August 12th. Pauline is alleged to have insisted on going with Buford. However, Chief Deputy Jim Moffitt said that that was not the norm, that he usually went on calls with Buford, and he insisted that he didn't know of any calls that Pauline went on. Do you have something you can add there?
Yeah, it wasn't uncommon for a spouse to ride along during the day shift when nothing was happening back in the 60s and 70s. For the new police officers today, that's not an option. But back then, it did happen on occasion. But knowingly going to a hot call where violence is going to happen, you would not want to take your wife with you. I mean, I just can't see how that was reasoned even back in the 60s.
You and I both have been in law enforcement, and I think that we can both say that a disturbance call is one of the most dangerous that you can go on, because you don't know what to expect. You don't know if anyone is armed. You don't know what their temperament is. So it really struck me as odd that Buford would allow Pauline to go with him on a call like that, especially when it was alleged to be down at the state line area.
Yeah, I find the word odd to describe that situation also. If you get a phone call at that time in the morning and it is a disturbance, the first thing the sheriff should have done was call his backup, call one of his other, deputies or chief deputy to meet him at a point they could ride together to the call, maybe something like that. But the last thing that I would ever do in that situation, even back in the 70s, would be ask my wife to go along on a call with me on a domestic violence or a shooting or stabbing at a bar or a nightclub.
Yeah. Well, briefly, another thing that caught my attention was when Carl Pusser was the jailer that night. He called Ward Moore, who was the county coroner, and told him to get over to Buford's house, that Pauline and Buford were in a fight. They were about to kill each other, and he wanted Ward to go over and see if he could break up the fight. But when he arrived, no one, neither Pauline nor Buford were there. And, he did tell me that he saw droplets of blood on the carpet, not much at all. But, without anyone being there, he had to leave the scene. And
a lot of people don't know from back then, the coroner was the only one who could make an arrest against the high sheriff of the county. So, for the father to call, it must have been something serious. Now, I had not heard that story until I, heard it from your book and your investigation. But that being said, who else would he call if it was going on but the coroner?
That call came in, and we have about 2 hours between the time that Ward Moore arrived until the ambush occurred. TBI agent Sloan and Chief Deputy Jim Moffitt placed the ambush as taking place around 4:45, when it would have been dark. But between the 2 hours that preceded that, they had left the house. We don't know where they were, and it's a short drive, basically, from their house to the ambush sites. Basically, it's a 17-mile ride.
Yeah. And the way he drove probably didn't take him 15 minutes to get there. I mean, everyone knows that he was heavy-footed when it came to driving his cruiser around. That's documented.
And the route they took that day also raised a lot of attention because they took a series of back roads to get to Hollis Jordan's place, a beer joint about a mile north of the state line. And it seems strange that he would take this set of back roads rather than get on Highway 64, go down to 45 and 45 straight to Hollis Jordan's. Beyond that, what I really wanted to get with you on today was we've all seen photographs of the ambushed vehicle, and there was blood on it, inside it, quite a quantity. And I want to talk about blood spatter and what it tells an investigator. And
Right.
You've had some experience with that.
Yeah, I was a professionally trained crime scene investigator, and my son of Roy Dean Baldwin, who he's not here today, but we have talked about this case a lot over the years. And he too, 20-year law enforcement officer, 2 years, which was actually a professionally trained crime scene investigator. And that's all he did for 2 full years, was investigate one crime scene after another. Here in Raleigh, North Carolina, we have what's called the CCBI, and that's all this group does. They come to a crime scene, and their next call is the next crime scene. So we're talking about what an officer might see in a 10 or 15-year career. My son has seen it all in 2 years, every single day for that 2-year period.
Yeah.
And we both have a lot of questions on the physical evidence from the car, from the photographs, things that weren't done back in the 60s that are currently done today by forensics and by professional law enforcement officers.
Well, the thing that I question is, for instance, you see blood on the hood of the car. Buford claimed that he didn't get out of the car. Pauline obviously didn't get out of the car, according to his story. So, you know, there's blood on the hood, on the windshield, on the passenger side panels. And when you look at the blood that's on the hood, the spatter, there's a tail to it. And that tail, it's like a drop of blood that tails out into an angle that points toward the windshield, which to me indicates that somebody was shot while they were in front of that car.
Correct. The blood splatter and the blood trace evidence does not match the story that the sheriff told. I mean, that's pretty obvious from the photographs that we've seen that are out on the internet.
Yeah, one that really gets me is there's a photograph of the door panel. Now, Buford's story was that they pulled up alongside him at the first ambush site on that bridge, fired a round that hit Pauline. He said that she leaned over on him. He couldn't get to his firearm. And yet later, 2 miles down the road, they're ambushed again by the same vehicle. The car stops right beside his because he has stopped to check on his wife. And he claimed that they pulled the gun, started shooting again. And, you know, basically he tried to protect her. But there is a spot on the panel door where you can see blood streaming down. And there's a void up near the little lock on the door panel. And when I say a void, there's an absence of blood, there's an absence of spatter there. The rest of it just kind of streams around that void. What do you see in that, Dean?
Well, I see that it doesn't match what was said by the sheriff. It's just almost physically impossible that that would happen. And I understand one thing, that when you're in the heat of something like that, you can get confused and you can, get your facts wrong. But there's so many different stories that have been told to where it's almost like one story is told to try to justify something else that has popped up that doesn't match the evidence. And that's concerning to me too, as an investigator.
I would have expected, if she had been shot as Buford described, that void would not be there. There would be, or at least be blood spatter in it. And when you look at that photograph, you really don't see anything. It's like she was bleeding and she was leaned over on that door panel.
Well, from my take, and I want to preference this with, we don't have all the information that the TBI has.
That's right.
But from what I've heard, that the first shot, some of the brain matter and skull was found up the road where Pauline was first shot, which would have been a fatal wound at that point.
Right.
Now, if they did ride where he says they stopped the second time and she was shot again and fell into his lap, my questions are, what did his uniform look like when he got to the hospital? Because there had to have been a large trace of blood in his lap from her head wound. So, but it looks like most of the blood came from over up against the door and a dripping and a flowing pattern, which would tell me that the heart is still pumping and not from splatter. So 2 head wounds, one hard enough to blow some of the brain matter and skull out of the window. I just don't see anybody living for that amount of time with those 2 wounds in the head, with the way the head was damaged, and things that I've also heard from the the actual funeral and how they had to repair the body of Pauline just for open casket.
Yeah, Ward Moore told me that he also worked at Shackelford Funeral Homes, and he told me that the wound on her head was so severe it took him, basically 8 hours to rebuild the top and back of her head just so they could have something to put a wig on. He used plaster of Paris and cotton to do that. And if you notice in a photo of her in her casket, her hair comes just above her eyebrows. And I think that was probably done to cover where that they had to do some reconstruction.
We all know the brain is the nerve center that controls the heart pumping and the nerves and all that. So if half the brain's laying out in the street and then you get another hit to the brain, I just don't see all that blood flow after that type of massive injury to the head. And then of course, if she fell over in his lap, I mean, how many pints of blood was on his uniform? I know we have a picture of him laying in a stretcher where he's got a lot of blood coming from his chin area, but I didn't notice any bleed through on the blanket from his groin area, which would have been heavily soaked if Pauline fell with that type of head wound, if she fell on his lap to where he couldn't pull his revolver out.
Well, yeah, your point's well taken, due to the fact that his story doesn't match the evidence. I mean, he said that the reason that he survived was that he fell to the floorboard and they thought he was dead. And yet he also claimed that, Pauline was leaning over on him and he couldn't even get to his firearm. So if she's leaning into him, how does he manage to fall to the floorboard when he's sitting behind that steering wheel?
Yeah, correct. And the blood splatter outside of the car is very concerning to me. That's more, a splatter would be more indicative of a smaller caliber weapon versus a 30-06. When they strike the body, there's a lot of velocity and force.
And let's keep in mind that we have a lot of things today, a lot of technology that wasn't used back then. The examination of blood spatter, became a little more prevalent right in the late 50s. And I don't know when it reached McNairy County and how informed TBI investigators and county investigators were in examining blood spatter patterns, because it was a new technology. Just like I do know that they could type the blood that was on the car and inside the car. But that's about all they could do. You know, they don't have things like now, like we do, like DNA. You know, for instance, you look at how that has changed investigations over the years. There's just a lot of things that have changed in that regard from the mid 1960s.
Right. Well, one thing, we would have taped off the crime scene and kept everybody out of it to make sure it didn't get contaminated. But a gunpowder residue test on everyone who was involved, and don't get me wrong, all defendants are always innocent until proven guilty, but you have to work people in, and then you have to work them out. You clear them or you bring them in the fold, basically. So there's things that were missed, or if they were done, we don't know about them. One would be, did the sheriff have any spent rounds in his revolver? Did he have any in his pocket if he reloaded, or were they laying at the crime scene? Or was there any lead contaminant left in the barrel of his pistol from just a couple of rounds? There's a big difference, the amount of dirt, lead, residue from being at the firing range, putting 300 or 400 rounds down range. You're going to have a buildup of lead in your barrel versus just a trace amount of lead from 2 shots or 3 shots from your revolver. So even if it was fired and he reloaded it, my question is, was that weapon analyzed for that type of use? And you can tell if it was recent or old. I mean, I've seen a guy pull out a pistol one time and his bullets were actually green. They had actually turned green. They had sit in his gun so long, he hadn't been to the firing range in years. And, my thing is, it probably wouldn't have fired if he needed it in a gun battle.
Yeah.
But, were those things even looked at? Did they confiscate his weapon? Did they test it? I want to see those type of things.
Well, right now on some of those issues, about all we can do is speculate, and I don't want to really get into a lot of speculation because we don't know what the TBI knows. I do know
Right.
that while I've been looking at this story, as you have, found witnesses that the investigation didn't speak with back then. I don't believe they spoke with any of your relatives back in 1967. I know I found people that were first at the crime scene that TBI didn't investigate back then. They have gone on record as such. And one thing I'd like to say is I would appeal to anybody who's watching this video that has some information about the ambush to contact the TBI. You can do so by calling 1-800-TBI-FIND, F-I-N-D, and give them your information. If you have firsthand information, that's great. If a relative who had information passed it along to you, they'd like to hear that, because that often leads to another thing that they need to check into during the investigation. But I believe since they've re-engaged, that they will be able to eventually close this case now.
Well, there's hearsay evidence, there's circumstantial evidence, there's prima facie evidence, and those aren't clear and concise, but they'll point you towards other evidence. You definitely want more than the preponderance of the evidence. You want to, innocent. They're always innocent until proven guilty, but you want beyond a reasonable doubt, and you want clarity, concrete evidence when you make a criminal charge. Now, you don't need that to make a civil charge, just a preponderance for civil. Like if a family member was to sue another family member for a wrongful death or for any type of crime, and I'll use O.J. Simpson's crime, where the family sued him after his murder charge. He was found not guilty of that homicide, but then he was found liable in civil because of the preponderance of the evidence only needs to outweigh the other side.
Yeah. Well, listen, we're going to have to wrap this session up, but I will say that TBI is re-engaged in this. They're checking everything. They're contacting leads and witnesses that were not available back then. So we'll leave it at that for now. And as we get more information in, we'll share it with everyone here.
Well, thank you for allowing me to be on your program, Mike.
I appreciate you being here today.
Thank you.